Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana Ame and
Jackie Sanders. We are two art professionals sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
we talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop an episode every Tuesday.
So today we're diving into a part of the creative process that I feel like very easily gets overlooked, and that is pausing and reflecting on your work, right? Like we all like to think about pushing forward and new techniques and new styles and new materials, or even pushing forward on the things we already do and maybe we already feel comfortable with. But sometimes it's just important to take that step back to really see where we are in our creative journey and pivot if necessary, honestly.
Absolutely. And I think that is a really important thing because oftentimes with any project, but especially a creative project that we're working towards, it can often feel like you're just focusing on, well, I'm not doing enough here. I'm not doing enough there. And you're more so focused on increasing that energy and maybe art production or time in the studio, which is super helpful. Do not get me wrong. But we're going to be talking about how taking a break, taking that time to step back, really reassess the importance of the ideas that you're exploring, allow space for new ideas to come in, managing the million and one ideas that we all have floating around to then find clarity moving forward rather than sticking with tunnel vision. All of those things are made possible by taking breaks in your creative practice.
I know. I feel like some of us can be a little bit bad about taking breaks, but that's basically what we want to talk to you all about. So, one of the first things, that comes to mind is that idea where you have to reflect on your art practice, right? Like, it's crucial for growth and innovation. By taking the time to reflect, it allows you to understand what works, what doesn't, where your artistic journey might lead next. Also comes to mind for me for those folks that maybe are still trying to figure out what their style is. If you're so hyper focused on, I got to make it cohesive, I got to use this color palette, I got to use this theme, etc. Sometimes we just kind of get lost in that highway of ideas. And by taking that step back, regardless of where you are in your career level, it allows you to take like analyze, right, that latest series of projects, especially if you just finished the big thing, and then you can look back and say, okay, was there something about that that I want to carry on in future paintings, right? Maybe it was a new texture, maybe it was a new tool, maybe it was a new idea, or even an idea that you had backburnered before that you brought forward that emerged through the series that you're like, whoa, there's a through thread here I hadn't seen before, right? And it just kind of pops
Mhm.
up. And then you can decide, okay, is this something that I'm noticing, good or bad? Is this something that I'm noticing that I want to carry forward? Like, do I like this gestural mark? Do I like the way this transparency worked, etc.? Going a little more technical, or are you gonna go, no, actually, I am purposely and intentionally gonna leave that behind, right? So that's something to think about. Another thing is, I think it's very healthy depending on how you work. And a lot of examples that we may give you, of course, we're mainly painters, visual artists, so a lot of them are going to be related to that, but I feel like this applies to other practices the same way. Depending on how you work, I know artists that, for example, do two bodies of work or two series of work a year, right? And that's all they do. And then they get to take that break in the middle, which may or may not line up with summer break, right? The ones I know, they have kids, so it lines up with summer break for their kids too. But and then some of you work year round. So something to think about is like, okay, I need to step back away periodically, and let's think about what time of the year can we do that in a way that stepping away from the studio can provide a fresh perspective? So whether that's you always travel around the holidays or always take a break around holidays or in the summer, etc. Um, I kind of want you to think about of like what times of the year roughly the way that your art practice work and your creativity and everything else, which is cyclical, which times of the year would allow you to take that break to step back. especially if you don't have this already built in based on, how your flow of the year goes, then try to think maybe once or twice a year, when can I actually step back and not do anything art related for at least a week, right? And then try to schedule that out. Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, with any type of routine, that is always needed. And I am definitely guilty of being hyper focused on routines. I thrive on structure and planning out my day, planning out my week, my month. But really being able to have that insight of relaxation to let your mind rest and not have that pressure of immediate creation time can just be so, so beneficial as we've been talking about. So almost being disciplined enough to take that time to rest. One thing that I've really connected with recently is the idea of your discipline is not always shown in your work ethic, but it's shown in your rest ethic. Because oftentimes it can be so easy to race forward somewhat blindly towards a goal that we had or that we set. But having the discipline to be able to set boundaries between your creative practice and your personal life. Boundaries of, I said, Sundays are going to be my rest day where I'm not working on my art or I'm not working on my business, and actually sticking to that. That's that healthy balance that's needed and really shows that discipline, and is a lot more sustainable, as all of us know. We've all experienced those phases of burnout. So proactively instilling those breaks and scheduling them, but also sticking to them. That's the biggest thing. Um, because then that becomes part of your creative routine. Whether you set aside time to not focus on your art at all, maybe you set aside time to really reflect on your routine, to assess, okay, once a month, I'm going to look at my how I'm spending my time, how things with my practice are going, how things in my personal life, day job, whatever it is, to really reflect, does this schedule still serve me and serve the goals that I am working towards? But consciously planning time to reflect rather than waiting till someone or something gets like so stressful that it boils over, and you're going to be forced to reflect on it more reactively than proactively. Especially when it comes to exploring and finding new ideas for your creative practice. Having those times of rest where you can allow yourself to experiment with new techniques, new ideas, new concepts without that pressure of a specific outcome can be so, so beneficial as an artist. Anytime we talk to other professional artists, which we all, I think, consciously know, and we know that idea of, oh, well, inspirational strike when you're like least expecting it, or I had this experiment that I really didn't think was going anywhere. And then that catapults like a 7 year long creative style for an artist, right? It always starts with some playful, small experiment that they were doing naturally and idly as they were resting. Um, so really utilizing that time, kind of getting out of your own head, but somewhat knowing that it's going to help or push you forward, can be a hard balance to have. But having that time to experiment freely, allow yourself to create without that need of, okay, I have this deadline, I have to have this deliverable product or this number of pieces by this show. That's a very different type of art making than freely experimenting and really allowing yourself to embrace the process too. That's a second big point in terms of enjoying the process of exploration and discovery, even if it doesn't lead to those immediate results that we as artists love having, but is not always part of the process.
Yeah, I think that's something else that, especially for those folks that maybe are more classically trained, highly, highly recommend trying the more experimental or even intuitive abstract styles, maybe as part of a workshop where you get to or vice versa. Maybe you only do intuitive and you want to learn the more classical version, but giving yourself permission to step away from I know how to do this to get a specific outcome and trying it a different way, trying a different process, trying a different technique. Maybe it's in the way of like following a workshop that you're seeing online, right? That's another way. But trying to be open-minded enough to say, okay, I need to source ideas from different places, right? Inspiration comes in different forms. whether I'm going to a museum and there's a painting there that inspired me or sculpture, or I'm spending time in nature, or maybe it's just something I saw in my day-to-day life. It could be the way the light shines through the window onto this mug I really love that's sitting on the counter, right? Like it could be anything really. But being open-minded, which again, part of this pausing for reflection idea we're discussing today it's basically about saying, okay, can I intentionally pause and look at what I'm working on, look at what I'm doing, but then take a step back, right? With that comes to, which we love this idea of keeping a creative journal, right? This allows you to document those experiments you're doing. It allows you to revisit ideas later that perhaps right now pop up and you're like, how does this fit into the grand scheme of my body of work?
Mhm.
Like, I'll give you an example. I'd love to do a series based on planets. I'm a space nerd. I love space stuff, right? But my current body of work, it's mostly abstract and botanical. How am I going to fit a planet series in it? So for now, it goes into the back burner as in, I'm not gonna forget about you. This might be a 3 years down the road situation where it comes back up, right? And that is fine. But I did give it the time of day. If I was only focused on the type of work I do right now, I would not be able to see, as the saying goes, the forest from the trees. I wouldn't even think of this is something I could do later on down the road, or worse yet, I could just try to discard it and be like, "Nah, that doesn't fit. That no." Instead, I can journal about it and be like, "Okay, I don't know how it fits yet, but maybe later."
Mhm.
And a lot of times there's things I've written down, and you betcha, sometimes even without thinking about it, they do come back up again, but I already have my notes on the intentions, the ideas, the inspiration. So I'm ready to go and hit the ground running. But if I hadn't paused, that wouldn't have happened. So it's
Mhm.
one of those interesting, like almost catch 22s in a way of like, could it? But if I pause too long, will I get stuck? And the answer is no, you won't. The pause doesn't have to be huge. But next up, we're going to be talking about managing the multitude of ideas that can flood our brains and embracing the creative flow. But we're going to take a quick word from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by our Level Up Artist courses.
We understand that life as a modern artist can be both exciting and overwhelming. Plus, there's a lot of information out there. So, what do visual artists actually need?
We've spent countless hours of trial and error, weeding through tons of information to find the gold, so you don't have to waste your time going down those endless rabbit holes.
In addition to weekly calls, we have created video course modules to cover everything from artist documents to exhibition prep, social media to technology, sales strategies, artist mindset, PDF resources, templates, and so much more.
Ready to get started? Head on over to levelupartists.com to learn more, get immediate access, and level up your career today.
Welcome back, everybody. So, we've all experienced when we have all these numerous ideas. It can be a blessing and a challenge. So it's important to discern where when some of these ideas that kind of pop up are distractions and when they are worth pursuing, right? It's important to learn to manage and prioritize your creative thoughts in order to maintain focus on and productivity. And a quick example for this is if you say work, I'm gonna use a painting example. Let's say you're mainly an acrylic painter, right? And now you have this idea to work in watercolors. There's things between the two that are very similar, water-based, and depending how you do it, you may be able to combine them, right? So there's like some alignment there. But let's say the thing that pops up is, oh, I want this custom canvas. And then suddenly you're now going down the woodworking route because now you're going to make this custom thing and you need drills and saws and things. That might be a little too far out, right? Like, doesn't mean they can't tie into each other, but it might be a wait, if I now try to learn this completely new, very unrelated thing that doesn't have a lot of through lines, what kind of detour will that become? And is it a worthy detour or is it just for fun? Or is it creative procrastination because there's something on the canvas that you don't want to face? So you're going to try something else in the meantime, right? We've all done it. We've all done it. So it's kind of like trying to figure out which one is it, recognizing what it is, no judgment, and then deciding what you want to do about it. So one of the easiest things you can do is to try to prioritize your ideas literally by writing them down. Old school, right? I know. But basically saying, ooh, I want to do this thing in wood. I want to do the planets, which I discuss here shortly. I want to do a series about, I don't know, my grandparents or about the country they came from or whatever, right? Write it down. Write it down and be like, okay, if my next 20 paintings are about the same subject or cohesive subject, which of these ideas would I do first, right? The other thing is when you do that list, identify which ones are distractions. Again, look, we're artists. Just because we're creative doesn't mean we can't have hobbies too that are nothing related to the rest of our body of work or how we present ourselves out there. We need fun stuff to do too that has nothing to do with it. Same medium, different medium, it doesn't matter. Maybe I want to take cooking classes and become a sushi chef. Who knows? I'm making that up. But I do love sushi. But for example, that might be, in my case, that would be a total distraction. It's still creative. So it still have something that inspires the rest of my visual artwork. But I mean, if I sit down with myself, one to one, taking sushi classes to become a chef, that would 100% be a distraction. So
A delicious distraction though, but
I do
maybe something, yeah, maybe something you identify as a distraction and then still put it on a list, maybe like a 1 day list, and then you can come back to it if it's kind of still picking at your brain. And I think that's a great way to do it. Of, as you mentioned, prioritize your ideas first, make that large, exhaustive list, get them all out of your brain. Then identify, okay, what are these are relatively clear distractions of, oh, well, I just watched Great British Baking Show this past weekend. So now I just want to deep dive into culinary. Like, do I really want to do that and spend the time in exchange for my art making? Maybe I do, but that has to be a conscious choice. But definitely identify those distractions. And then the next thing, which is the exciting part, is to really just follow the sparks, determine which of those ideas you genuinely are excited about and seem worth exploring more. So making sure that it has enough legs, that it's not just one painting you want to do, that it could evolve into a series. So following that spark and then setting a boundary around it so that you can actually move forward with it. Establish limits for how many projects you can realistically take on at one time. Because as creatives, we all have very fun, exciting ideas that any one of them could be a full on business. Any one of them could full on make you money if you run fast enough in that direction, right? And if it's a right fit for you. But you can't do all of those at one time in every season of life, right? So assessing all those things to establish which of these am I pursuing, how many can I pursue right now, how much time do I have allotted. So you also set yourself up for success in that art making process, which I think comes to another point that I think is super important and one that I've really had to learn over the last few years is learning to embrace your individual creative flow. What is that routine of when you feel the most creative that no one else can really tell you? And that's part of the aspect of being an artist. We're all entrepreneurs. And so part of being an artist is learning about yourself. When do you feel the most energized? When do you feel the most creative? When do you feel the most drained? If you're an introvert, maybe don't have your sole creative time right after a huge networking event that you want to prioritize because you may just be drained and want to sit on the couch and recharge for a bit, right? Or maybe your creative practice is what recharges you. Maybe it is what energizes you. So you're saying, okay, I'm going to do this thing and then I'm going to go and lock away for a day or two to recharge. The biggest thing that I found for me was even smaller scale and just a single day standpoint. I am most creative first thing in the morning, which was difficult at times because obviously having a full-time day job, then you still have to show up to a day job at a specific time and then leave at a specific time. But I found that every time I was trying to make artwork in the evening, I am a huge extrovert. So anytime someone would want to make plans, I'm like, yeah, totally. Like, I want to go. And I would cancel my studio time. And that's not saying I wasn't committed to my art practice, but like I wasn't setting myself up for success. I was constantly scheduling my art making time at a time when like any one thing could be in the middle of me not doing it. So, also knowing that I'm most creative in the morning, started waking up earlier. So, kind of started setting my alarm earlier each and every day. That resulted in a morning creative practice that realistically no one else is up that early, so no one's going to be asking me to hang out. I get my creative time, and then I found that the rest of the day, whatever kind of happens in my social circle, is not going to affect my creative energy in the morning. So it's identifying when you feel the most creative, when you feel the most productive, and then seeing, okay, which parts of my schedule can be flexible to fit around that. But having that time blocked off is so, so helpful. And that can involve your physical environment too. Do you prefer making artwork in your home, in your basement, in your living room? Maybe you have a studio that's outside of your home. Maybe you have a public facing studio, but also like a home work area. So figuring out what are those things. Maybe it's the ritual of lighting a candle that kind of shifts the energy. Whatever those physical environment things are, incorporating that and leaning into them as part of your creative routine.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of routines, like, consistency is key with this. So trying to develop a regular routine can definitely like encourage a steady creative output. So that is one of those things, like as we're talking about, taking these breaks and everything else, I think it feels a lot easier coming back from a break if you already have a plan. So maybe you're the sort of person that's like, okay, I go to the studio Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, right? And you took a mini vacation. When you come back, you already know Monday of that week when you get back, you're going back into the studio because you already have a set routine for it. It also helps with your brain if you are having those days where I'm like, ooh, I had a rough weekend, for example, but I know Monday I have something to look forward to. And whether I feel creative or not, I'm going to show up in my creative practice. I don't have to wait for inspiration. I always have stuff to do, in the studio. There's always something to varnish, something to, and we have episodes about that, of course. Like, there's always different things that you can do to get that creative engine working. But if you already have that routine of when you show up, it also helps you mentally be like, okay, we're doing this. Like, this is what we always do, to set that routine. And I think that also might make it a little bit easier to allow for mindful breaks, like intentional breaks, where you can encourage rest, where you can recharge, where you can ensure that your creative energy is sustained. You've heard us talk about it a lot, like creativity is a lot like an engine, creativity is a lot like a battery. It's something that does deplete. Like when you've done, if any of you, I'm sure a lot of you have that are listening, if you've ever done a series of work where not only were you working against a deadline, let's say you were working on 20 paintings or 20 sculptures or 20 of whatever you make that you had to do, especially on a sped up timeline. When you leave that, it's like you ran a marathon. Mentally, it almost feels like you ran a marathon. There's so much involved, there's so much stress, whatever. You're literally tired when you're done. Even if your artistic practice isn't necessarily physically taxing, a lot of times it will be mentally taxing, right? And that takes a toll on your creativity as well. So by allowing these breaks, by intentionally taking these breaks, these pauses we're talking about, you're allowing your creativity to also recharge. That's why earlier we were talking about different sources of inspiration and like just being intentional about getting some of this back into you because that's what feeds what comes next. And about writing things down because that's what feeds that's where what comes next comes out, if you will. But if you don't have enough bandwidth to do it, it's not going to happen. So
Mhm.
and that invites burnout, which we've talked about. So please look through our episode catalog because we definitely discussed that. Not taking those breaks, that is something that it can invite into your life that nobody wants, and that's straight up burnout. So, with these different practices that we were discussing today, this is to help you enhance your creative process, to manage your ideas effectively, especially the lists, priority lists we were talking about, and to try to maintain a healthy balance and boundaries. between that idea of productivity, which we're very much geared towards, our society is at least, and taking those pauses for reflection, right? So just to put it in a nutshell, please to remember that that time to pause and reflect, it's probably just as important, if not as don't come after me. Um, as the process of making art itself, because again, it's like a battery, and if you run out and you're running on fumes, how are you gonna make stuff? So you definitely need both. But yeah, with that, we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up, and we hope you enjoyed this episode.
As always, our blog will be linked in the show notes where you can find episode notes and links to every other podcast episode.
And if you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share your feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can reach us through social media. I'm at Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio across all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we're at Level Up Artists on Instagram.
You can also visit levelupartist.com to get immediate access to templates, resources, and course modules to level up your creative career today.
Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.